Sweetbread, an epilogue, a conclusion. My sister has always possessed a gentle spirit, gentle like sweetbread. She wept for the old woman, despite everything that had transpired. Perhaps it was because of everything. I can still recall holding her, as she sobbed, both of us covered in ash. Her hands burned from keeping the oven door shut. Once the tears subsided, she fell silent. She followed me through the dreadful house with its sweetbread-like walls and sugary windows. I located the garments. We arrived in, offered her the kirtle, and she slipped it on without uttering a word. When we discovered the treasure in the attic, she merely nodded vaguely when I asked for her help in filling the few bags we could manage to carry back through the woods. Perhaps this would be sufficient. Sufficient to shield us from our stepmother's caprices. I dread returning there. That was the first thing spoken in hours. I lingered outside the witch's cottage, glancing back at her. I do not wish to return to them. I sighed. Neither do I, but where else can we go? She twisted her fingers nervously in front of her skirt, her gaze lowered and her teeth biting into her lower lip. Eventually she gave a nod. All right, you're right. She glanced back at the house just a moment. There might be something left in the kitchen. The kitchen? I echoed in shock, but she simply nodded. Yes. She didn't realize I was paying attention, but I was. I know which of her potions could prove useful. If nothing else, we could sell them once we get back. I nodded slowly and trailed after her into the cottage, though I paused at the entrance to the kitchen. She moved effortlessly through the space, reminding me painfully of how long she had been under the witch's control, while the vile crone attempted to fatten me like a prized pig. She gathered a dozen bottles and vials, carefully tucking them among the bolts of silks and satins we had stolen from the attic before returning to me. Let's leave. Even though there wasn't a clear path this time, she seemed to navigate the trees effortlessly. I inquired about it once while we took a moment to let the darkness pass. All she offered was that she just knew now, as if the forest had begun to communicate with her in ways it hadn't before. That realization sent a shiver of fear through me. Yet I recognized that she was still deeply frightened herself. So I masked my own feelings from her. I attempted to encourage her to imagine the kind of life we could lead with the witch's stolen riches, which earned me a faint smile, albeit a bittersweet one. But the night remained cold and dark, and soon we found ourselves huddled together beneath a twisted tree, waiting for the darkest hours to fade. As the gray dawn light began to seep through the foliage, she was the first to rise. She had grown quiet again, responding only with soft hums or brief words as we moved forward. She appeared more at ease taking the lead now, yet something in the way her shoulders were set reminded me of something elusive that I couldn't quite identify. Eventually, I fell into her silence. When the trees parted to reveal the familiar outline of our father's house, she came to an abrupt halt. Then, without warning, she sprinted ahead, and I hurried to keep pace with her. By the time we reached the porch, the door was already swinging open, and our father stood there with open arms and tears glistening in his eyes. He enveloped us tightly, repeating apologies and praising the Lord's name. I returned his embrace, but alongside the relief swelling in my chest, a simmering anger churned in my gut. It had ignited like a spark, but during our journey back through the woods, it had transformed into a steady blaze. I caught my sister's gaze over our father's shoulder, and a chill coursed through me. If my anger resembled a flame, then hers felt like the frigid grip of the deepest winter. Our father informed us that our stepmother had fallen ill shortly after we departed. She was currently in her room, asleep for several days now. He didn't hold much hope for her recovery, even though he was doing his best to adhere to the doctor's recommendations. Maybe she will rally to see you, he suggested optimistically. When neither of us responded, he let out a sigh and ran his hand through his thick beard, which had more gray than I remembered. I know you must be upset with me, with us, he said sadly. That I could lose track of you so easily is an unforgivable mistake for a father. Lost? I flinched at the sharpness in my sister's voice, and our father did as well. She had always spoken softly, reflecting her gentle nature. Were we lost? She pressed, fixing her gaze on him intently. Our father met her stare, his eyes wide with a touch of fear. Lost, he finally confirmed, barely above a whisper. I lowered my gaze, unable to keep looking at him. My sister, however, did not look away. Suddenly, she rose from our small table. We will go see her then. I blinked, taken aback by both her swift movement and the determination in her tone, but I followed her into our stepmother's sick room. The flicker of anger in my chest grew stronger, and I found myself unable to step more than 2 paces inside the door. My sister knelt beside the woman I despised, gently smoothing her hand over her forehead in a way that made me want to lash out. Here. She tilted one of the witch's vials to her lips. This will help. I almost reached out to stop her, but sensing my motion, she extended a hand back toward me to halt me. Once the vial was empty, she stood and brushed her hands down her skirt. She didn't glance at me as she exited the room. I lingered for a moment longer, staring at the woman who had abandoned us to the woods and wilderness. Already her breathing appeared to be less labored. Inside me, love and anger for my sister clashed, 2 flames battling in my chest. She had always possessed a gentle heart. Our stepmother was up and animated within a day. Although she was taken aback by our unexpected return, the treasures we brought back seemed to soften her demeanor, prompting her to feign tears as she expressed her sorrow over our time lost in the woods. My anger intensified, while my sister grew increasingly distant. We should celebrate your return, our stepmother declared, draping a shawl around her shoulders, showing no signs of her previous illness. What would you like for dinner, my dears? Sweetbread. I spun around to look at my sister, my eyes wide and mouth open in shock. She didn't even glance my way, but I felt her hand slip into mine beneath the table. She smiled at our stepmother, and I felt a lump form in my throat. But you're still recuperating, stepmother, I interjected. I feel quite fine. All things considered, I can handle it, she replied softly. At that moment, I could have stopped her. I could have grasped her hand tightly and pulled us away. We could have taken the treasure and left. My earlier belief that there was nowhere to go was foolish. We could venture anywhere. The thought of seeing our father again, only to hear him deny their wrongdoings, solidified that notion. Yet, my sister's fleeting glance at me, filled with icy resolve, immobilized me in my seat. She wasn't seeking my approval, but I nodded hesitantly nonetheless. Our stepmother praised her as a good, kind girl while heading to the kitchen. Before long, the sickly sweet aroma of baking sweetbread filled the air, making it a struggle for me to keep from gagging. My sister plated the steaming bread, even drizzling the last of our honey reserves over our parents' servings. We can always get more at the market now, she said with a hollow laugh. Our stepmother agreed cheerfully, though our father paused briefly before doing the same, observing my sister with a hint of caution as she settled beside me. Go on then. Let us eat. And they did. We remained silent. It was our stepmother who felt it first. A slight cough escaped her lips and a look of confusion crossed her face. But that expression quickly morphed into sheer horror as she locked eyes with my sister. You? Our father gasped, blood staining his mouth. I turned my gaze away, gripping my sister's hand tightly, which she had once again taken beneath the table. We were in a desperate situation, he managed to say, reaching out to her with a pleading look. I didn't want to. She forced me. My sister shook her head firmly. You allowed it. He slumped forward onto the table, his breath turning into a wheezing rattle that faded with each passing second. Our stepmother attempted to reach for us, but her legs buckled and she fell to the floor. A crimson stream reminiscent of sweet jam oozed from the corner of her mouth. You, she gasped again, glaring at my sister with venomous eyes. You little witch. Both of them began to convulse. I buried my face in my sister's shoulder, feeling her gently stroke my hair. Even without lifting my head, I knew she didn't look away until their final breaths dissolved into silence. Then, she simply stood up, still holding my hand. We remained quiet as we collected our bags, still unpacked by the front door. and stepped out into the cool evening air. You are scared. I swallowed hard. Yes. She smiled at me, gave my hand another reassuring squeeze, but all I felt was a chill. You don't have to be afraid, I will keep you safe. My sister has always possessed a gentle heart, gentle like poisoned sweetbread. Venus buried. The girl resting in the graveyard is your closest companion, so you decide to take her back home. The night hangs heavily between you, a dark smudge against the passenger window, reminiscent of overripe fruit left to decay. Her body strains against the seatbelt, first with one finger, then another. The radio crackles with static as she shifts in her seat. You examine her face, the familiar line of her jaw, the nose slightly crooked from a baseball incident at age 12. Her skin resembles a plastic bag dampened by rain. A pungent mix of musk and sulfur fills the air. You want to avert your gaze, but you find it impossible. She remains strikingly beautiful, even in this state. Your headlights slice through the dirt road, casting a sickly yellow glow. Your hands ache from the chill, and your lips are chapped. The girl next to you is lifeless, and you're on your way to bring her home. Just 4 days ago, you walked into a hardware store and came out with a shovel robust enough to unearth a life. For 4 days, you toiled in your backyard, digging until the soil turned to mud beneath your nails, and erratic holes marred the garden beds like the mouths of insatiable creatures. You could sift through the earth with your eyes shut, or even with one hand tied behind your back. 4 sleepless nights were spent staring at the pockmarked ceiling, contemplating what it would be like to burn alive. Now the shovel thuds dully against the trunk, while your grip on the steering wheel tightens, like you're trying to choke something into silence. As dawn breaks, the body shifts, light washing over her salmon gray skin. One eye slips from its socket, and she casually pushes it back in with her palm. A smile spreads across her face, her head swaying like a puppet's. "Sorry, darling." Her voice is strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." Bathed in a sliver of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus beams up at you, her gums ghostly white. Adeline Marcus passed away on October 31st and was laid to rest a week later, her gravestone marking a date just a month before her 18th birthday. In court, the boys would insist it was an accident, claiming they had no idea she was inside. For better or worse, you find yourself believing them. The matchboxes scattered about and the beer cans littering the sidewalk paint a picture of a prank that spiraled out of control, a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Intent doesn't matter. She didn't have to be home. The coroner concluded it was suffocation, but all you can envision is flames, relentless and harsh, striking again and again. Adeline had crawled from the house on her hands and knees, but by the time she reached the pavement, she was already gone. Her Sunday dress burned up to her knees, the very same dress you recognized. Regardless of the circumstances, the boys faced 25 years to life in prison, while the Marcus family was left mourning their daughter, a ring of ash resembling chalk marking the spot where she fell. You were left grappling with an overwhelming sense of guilt, akin to an insatiable hunger, an ouroboros of remorse, choking on its tail, consuming its own head, devouring yourself alive without the ability to stop, even as it engulfs you. Because this wasn't something that happened to decent people. You observe water swirling down your shower drain, taking with it remnants of mortuary makeup, colorful insects, and fragrant jasmine bubbles. Strings of dirt stretch out like sinews. The body's head rests against her knees, her vertebrae poking through her back like a row of molars. The electric lights cast a green hue over her dark veins, which lie beneath her fragile skin. She tilts her face toward the shower head, picking at the powdery residue under her nails. The shower floor is cluttered with grime, and you think of a child gathering sand. You crank up the heat until it burns, scrubbing mildew from the base of the shower door. You convince yourself that if you can just get everything spotless, then everything will be okay. She turns her head and gazes at you through eyes clouded by glass panels. "It's not as bad as all that," she says. I don't even think I felt a thing. Yet her lips are the color of spoiled plums, making her words feel disingenuous. You pull out worn-out towels from the back of your linen closet. After taking a stroll around your block 3 times, you come back to find a lifeless girl sitting on your sofa, as if she has nowhere else to go. Your sugar bowl is infested with ants. You attempt to get rid of them, using a fork to lift their tiny bodies, but they slip away, leaving you with an even bigger mess. Brownish goo oozing from their bodies and the sour scent of vinegar fills the air. There's a deceased girl on your sofa, yet here you are, fixated on the ants in your sugar bowl, watching them weave through the white granules like veins on a leaf, reminiscent of the capillaries beneath your skin. Despite everything, you brew some tea. You pour in too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the corpse. She gazes at you, and you return her stare. As both of you sip, streams of diluted milk flow out of her trachea, spilling from the gaping wound in her chest, yet she continues drinking until you stop. You're not really looking at me, she remarks. I am, you fidget with your hands on the shag carpet, aren't I? No, she replies, you're not. You leave your teacup on the floor, its saucer a bright splash of yellow, and head upstairs. You grab 2 cigarettes from the crumpled pack on your father's desk, but reconsider, crushing them underfoot until the tobacco scatters into the tawny carpet. You change your bed sheets twice, first to eggshell white, then to gray adorned with peonies. You prepare another cup of tea. When you return to the room, the body remains there. You are looking at her, yet you are also avoiding her gaze. Do I repulse you? She asks. No, you shake your head, her dark hair clinging to her shoulders like reeds. Not more than I always have. You need rest, you suggest. Sweetheart, she tilts her head slightly. Sleeping is all I've ever done. The last time you encountered Adeline Marcus alive, she was nestled in the back seat of a stranger's car, parked on an unfamiliar street, with the taste of a stranger's tequila lingering on your lips. You both were never really the party type, which resulted in 2 girls who seemed to be playing dress-up. You wore loose-fitting dresses with sleeves reminiscent of a nun's attire, thrift store necklaces dangling around your necks, and shoplifted lipstick that she stashed under her mattress, more waxy than colorful. Yet, under the glow of streetlights and the soft hum of distant music, you both radiated beauty. She sat sideways in the back seat, legs curled beneath her, one hand resting on your knee while the other pressed against the window, humming a tune you couldn't quite identify. The closeness felt intense, but it was nighttime. Everyone else was indoors and intoxicated, and sometimes we crave that intimacy, wanting to lose ourselves just a little. The melody faded from her lips, absorbed by the mix of saliva and alcohol, prompting you to say something like, I think I should head home now. Her response was along the lines of, have another drink. So you did. You allowed her to fill flimsy red plastic cups with liquor and watched as she took a sip. She remarked, You're so pretty. You replied, I think you should stop. To which she responded, just let me say that one thing. You felt the urge to tell her to stop staring at you like that, to express how you wanted to dive into her mind and create a life there, and to suggest that silence might be better. Let's not spoil this moment by revealing too much truth. Instead, you opened the passenger door and stumbled onto the vein blue sidewalk. I'm going home now. The body lies facing away from your bed, fingers tangled in the floral sheets, chestnut hair cascading over her throat, draping past the ink-stained bedposts and spilling over her pale forehead. You are focused on data. Up until October 2023, you find yourself contemplating the soft silken edges of a coffin. Memories flood back to when you rescued her from the heavenly embrace that felt like a rose. The radiator buzzes softly, while a lace curtain dances in the breeze from your open window. She turns onto her side, intertwining her fingers like pieces of a worn-out jigsaw puzzle. You still can't bear to meet my gaze. Her words come out slowly, like they're stuck. Why am I here, Bet? What's the purpose? The tips of your palms show pink crescent shapes from where you've bitten your nails. She curls her knees up to her chest, and a bone cracks audibly. As she pulls her knees closer, a molar falls from her lips, which resemble a keyhole. You can only love me in my absence. Your affection only exists when there's nothing left to hold on to. You lean your cheek against the cool linen beside her, listening to the rhythmic thump of your heart, feeling it pulse through your fingertips, completely unique. Don't tell anyone, you whisper. Did you want it to die with me, Bet? She shifts slightly, her hair brushing against the back of your neck. Were you relieved it was silenced? Don't tell anyone, you repeat firmly. She exhales deeply, settling back down so that you're face to face, her crooked nose and eye threatening to slip from its socket, and the creeping gray-green decay framing her jaw create a haunting image. The air is thick with the scent of earth, decay, and the heavy hum of cicadas at night. Who could I tell? She gently touches your hand. I'm not really here. In that moment, you envision your fists crushing beer cans as if they were ripe fruit, your fingers poised over a matchbox ready to strike. But deep down, you both understand that the house would still be ablaze, and you'd end up leaving on your own. You take her hand, burying your face in the curve of her neck, pleading for forgiveness from a specter. Drone. She first noticed the sound while brewing her morning coffee. The day had already begun on a sour note. Rachel had awoken, feeling sluggish and slow after hitting the snooze button twice, and reached for her husband's side of the bed. To her dismay, the spot where he usually lay was vacant and cold. She shot an annoyed glance at the empty space for a moment before hitting the snooze button again out of frustration. One downside of working from home was missing those sweet morning kisses, as Mark prepared for his daily commute. The silver lining, however, was that she could indulge in a few extra minutes of sulking about it. When her alarm finally signaled the end of her brooding session, Rachel let out a sigh, turned off the alarm for good, and dragged herself out of bed. Instantly, she felt the temptation to crawl back under the covers. The air outside her warm cocoon was brisk, as mid-October stubbornly held off on turning on the heater until absolutely necessary, thanks to Mark. To make matters worse, as soon as she stood up, every little discomfort of adult life hit her. Back pain, sore ankles, jaw ache from sleeping awkwardly, and an added joint pain due to the chill. Oh, and after standing for just a few moments, she also realized she needed to pee. All the usual complaints checked off. After a quick pit stop in the bathroom, Rachel shuffled into the kitchen like the zombie she sometimes thought she resembled. Whether she was undead or not, she still had bills to pay, which meant she needed to be awake enough to tackle her work. A strong, steaming cup of coffee was essential. She approached the coffee machine and slipped into her well-practiced routine, reaching for her morning reward almost instinctively. She grabbed a mug from the cupboard. Placing it under the machine's dispenser, she lifted the lid of the coffee maker. A buzzing sound started to fill the air. She reached back into the cupboard and pulled out a generic K-cup. The buzzing intensified. She inserted the cup into the coffee machine and closed the lid with a decisive motion. The crunching noise felt jarring. On the small touchscreen, she selected the 8-O's option. The buzzing morphed into a steady drone. With a press of the button below the screen, the machine whirred to life. Its sound was almost drowned out by the droning. Suddenly, she heard the floor creak behind her. It felt like something was observing her. Something was definitely watching her. The world snapped back into sharp focus as she spun around, almost knocking over a jar of sugar in her haste. Of course, there was nothing behind her. She was all alone in her apartment. Mark had left for work before she even woke up, and a quick glance to her right confirmed that he had locked the door on his way out. He even remembered to secure the deadbolt that morning. There was no one else around. The only sounds were the coffee maker steaming and Rachel's racing heartbeat. No buzzing, no droning. Taking a deep breath, Rachel leaned against the counter with a sigh. Shaking off the remnants of adrenaline, she opened the fridge to grab some creamer, pouring a generous splash into her cup. As she stirred her coffee, she reached for the pill container next to the sink. What better way to celebrate a fresh cup of coffee than by using it to wash down an innocuous little capsule? Not that she needed the caffeine anymore. After that strange experience, she was wide awake. Coffee in hand, she made her way across the apartment to settle into her office and dive into work. After more than 6 months, her job still felt like a dream come true. She had successfully secured a remote billing position with a telehealth practice. Medical billing was infamous for its overwhelming paperwork, but that was exactly what made it ideal for Rachel, figuring out rejection errors, filling out forms, and interpreting ERAs. That satisfied a mental craving she hadn't even known existed. And the cherry on top, throughout the entire process, she barely needed to interact with anyone. She could crank up some tunes, immerse herself in paperwork, and forget about everything outside her office for hours. As she logged into the practice's EHR, she noticed several glaring red claim rejections waiting for her attention. All of them were from the same insurance provider and pertained to one clinician, leading Rachel to suspect an issue related to the NPI. This challenge led her to another, and before long, she found herself slipping into the rhythm of her work. She interpreted the error message. She shot off an email to the clinician. She opened the next set of rejections. She tuned out the monotonous background noise. She increased the volume of her music. She accessed a patient profile. She chose the billable service dates. The droning sound drowned out her music. She double-checked the payer's address. She completed the daunting red form. Her jaw continued to throb. She submitted the claim. It was overwhelmingly loud. She opened another ERA. The drone loomed just behind her. It felt like it was suffocating her. She struggled to breathe. Suddenly, her monitor went dark. She gazed at her reflection. Something else was staring back at her. With a gasp, Rachel pushed away from her desk, nearly toppling her chair in the process. She shivered and blinked at her computer screen, which remained illuminated with the awkward tables and blocks of text from the insurance paperwork. Turning her head to glance at the left side of the screen, she looked out her office window. The glare from the rising sun offered a clear view of her familiar reflection. It hadn't been real. Rachel was safe and alone. Nevertheless, she turned around to confirm that her office door was closed before sliding her chair back into place, just to be cautious, just for her own silly reassurance. The workday pressed on. She fell back into her routine, pushing herself to concentrate even as that unsettling drone began to creep back in. It wasn't real after all, just a figment of her imagination, a consequence of her sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on her. When lunchtime arrived at noon, just like it always did, Rachel paused, recalling the events of the morning. She needed to step out of her office, to grab her lunch from the fridge. Why did that make her feel uneasy? Even if the drone returned while she was in the kitchen, it posed no threat. It was just an illusion. Still, she decided to steer clear of the coffee machine, taking the longer route around the kitchen island to reach the fridge, all the while chiding herself for being foolish. She then noticed she had left the creamer out, which added to her frustration. What was going on with her that day? Why was everything feeling so off? Shaking her head in disbelief, she placed the likely spoiled creamer by the sink, planning to deal with it later after enjoying some leftover pasta. Opening the fridge, she grabbed a plastic container and lifted the lid. Her hands felt icy cold. She popped the container into the microwave and pressed the 1 button. Her hands trembled. The microwave hummed to life, but something felt wrong. The sound wasn't coming from the appliance. Turning around, Rachel saw the drone hovering in her office. The container continued to rotate inside the microwave. The drone edged closer to the door. Rachel felt a surge of danger wash over her. The droning resonated deep within her bones. She froze, feeling trapped with nowhere to escape. Suddenly, the microwave beeped, causing Rachel to yelp and jump, tears pricking at her eyes. She started to shake, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. There was nothing to fear, yet inexplicably Rachel felt as though she were being pursued by an unseen force. She couldn't quite put her finger on what it was, making her anxiety all the more maddening. After all, she was an adult. Surely she could manage a few odd sounds throughout her day. In a moment of contemplation, she thought about sending Mark a text. He could chat with her while he was at work. He had done it in the past. If she truly needed him, she believed he would rush home. But what exactly could she say? That there was an odd noise following her around the apartment, making her feel like she was on the brink of death? That sounded ridiculous. If she sent Mark that message, he would definitely come back, probably bringing a police officer to escort her to a mental health facility. Rachel took her food out of the microwave and set it aside on the counter to cool down. She had lost her appetite. She planned to toss it out later after her shift. Skipping lunch once wouldn't be the end of the world, right? It felt like she had been bombarding herself with similar questions over the last few hours, all while dodging the one question she really didn't want to confront. That question lingered in her mind as she returned to her office. It allowed her to sit back down and get comfortable at her desk again, but then it gradually crept back into her. Thoughts, coinciding with the rise of a disquieting, familiar sound. What could possibly be causing that noise? It was nothing, Rachel reassured herself. The hum that was wafting in from her doorway wasn't real, which meant nothing was actually producing it. Yet, that nothing was incredibly loud for something that didn't exist. The more Rachel concentrated on it, the more details she began to pick up. It was difficult to hear anything beyond the droning, but if she really tuned in, she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of footsteps on carpet as it drew nearer. The drone was giving her a headache, but she continued to focus on it. The sound approached closer. She could discern the whisper of feet on the carpet. It came even closer still. A chill radiated from it. It was right behind her. She could sense its shadow looming over her. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But it was. Rachel let out a scream as she swung into the open air, desperately trying to push away whatever was lurking behind her. To her dismay, it had vanished again, the unsettling drone retreating to the living room. It was there, in the living room, and she sensed something perilous waiting for her. It felt like a predator playing with its prey, fully aware that she was trapped. Now that she had acknowledged its presence, it seemed ready to strike. However, Rachel refused to be an easy target. With trembling legs, she forced herself to stand and stumbled toward the office door, shutting it firmly behind her. She turned the lock, though she doubted it would offer much protection, and began to back away. Just then, the drone surged to a deafening pitch, and a heavy force slammed against the hollow door. Startled, Rachel stumbled backward until she found herself cornered in her office with no escape in sight. The creature crashed against the door once more. Overwhelmed, Rachel sank to the floor. The drone's fury was palpable, and she knew the door wouldn't withstand the assault forever. Curling up with her knees hugged to her chest, she sobbed quietly. The door trembled under the weight of its rage. Closing her eyes, she wished for Mark's safety. Suddenly, the sound of splintering wood filled the air, followed by the creaking of the front door opening. Rachel? The monster halted its relentless attack and Rachel's head shot up. That was Mark's voice. "Oh no, not this." "Mark, don't come in," she shouted. "Get out. Lock the door behind you. Don't let it find you." "Rachel, what are you talking about?" Mark called back, ignoring her frantic warnings. To her horror, the drone shifted away from the office and headed toward the kitchen, where her oblivious husband was. Grief and panic collided in her throat, causing her to choke on her sobs. It was going to get Mark too. The monster would kill him and then return to finish what it had started with her. How long would it take for anyone to realize they were gone? Would her co-workers start to worry after days of silence? Would their neighbors notice that Mark's car never moved? Would her parents eventually call for a welfare check when she stopped replying to their texts? "Oh, sweetheart, it's all right, you're safe now. Can you please open your eyes for me?" With a sense of disbelief, Rachel slowly opened her eyes. She lifted her head and saw Mark kneeling in front of her, looking perfectly fine. The office door was wide open, and the apartment was quiet except for her own confused sobs. How could this be? Did the monster manage to escape through the front door? Did Mark take care of it? Can I hold you, darling? Mark asked as he settled down on the floor in front of her. Rachel nodded, and he gently encouraged her to come into his lap. There we go, he said softly. It's all right. I've got you. You're safe. You're safe. Rachel wrapped her arms around him, still trembling as she buried her face in his shoulder. Did you see it? She asked. Did you see where it went? Mark, I thought it was going to kill me. I almost died. Sweetheart, Mark replied, I'm not sure there was a monster at all. Do you think maybe you were hallucinating? What? Rachel felt her thoughts come to a sudden stop. Hallucinating. But remember, the psychiatrist reduced your ziprasidone dosage a couple of weeks ago, and she cautioned us that your brain might react negatively to it, Mark reminded her. She mentioned it could even trigger an episode, so we needed to keep an eye out for that. Do you think that's what happened? That you might have been hallucinating because your brain isn't adjusting well to the lower dose? In an instant, the hours of panic she had just experienced felt embarrassingly unnecessary. The last remnants of Rachel's panic faded away, replaced by a wave of hot shame that flushed her face and neck. Oh my God, she mumbled into Mark's shirt. I was totally hallucinating, wasn't I? She sensed Mark's shoulders relax beneath her head, a wave of relief washing over him. Yeah, Rach, I think so, he replied, gently toying with her hair. But it's all right. There's no need to feel embarrassed, remember? Schizophrenia can be quite unpredictable. We couldn't have been certain how you would handle reducing your medication, which is why we didn't go all in at once, right? Now we know. We'll get you back on your usual dose first thing tomorrow morning. Take a few days off work to ensure you're adjusting well, and we'll inform the psychiatrist that it didn't work out. It's okay. You're going to be fine. Rachel took deep breaths while he spoke, allowing his words to resonate within her. His comforting words didn't erase all her embarrassment, but they certainly helped. At the very least, she felt reassured that Mark wasn't angry. I really hope the neighbors weren't home, she said after a pause, lifting her head. I think I was screaming. I genuinely thought something was there, Mark. It's been years since I had an episode like that. Yeah, that sounds pretty rough, Mark agreed, leaning back on one hand. How about this? You clock out early, take the next few days off, and tell your boss you're not feeling well. Then you can relax on the couch while I whip up a big pot of chili with extra diced tomatoes, and we can spend the rest of the day watching terrible reality TV and perfecting the chili to Fritos ratio. Does that sound good? Rachel locked eyes with Mark for a moment, contemplating, then leaned in and kissed him. I love you, she said simply. Mark chuckled and replied, I'll take that as a yes. After sending a quick email to her boss and exchanging a few more kisses, Rachel found herself cozied up on the couch as promised, wrapped in the softest blanket she and Mark owned. A British chef was shouting on the television while Mark busied himself in the kitchen, rummaging through drawers and cabinets as the ground beef sizzled on the stove. For the first time since waking up, Rachel felt genuinely grounded and at peace. Hey Rach, do you know where our can opener is? Mark called from his spot by the stove. Check the sink, Rachel shouted back. The dishes clinked together for a brief moment before Mark let out a soft cheer. Success. He then turned on the faucet to clean the can opener. By the way, he inquired, why is our creamer sitting next to the sink? Oh, that was my mistake, Rachel admitted. I accidentally left it out this morning. Ugh, that's another sign I should have noticed. I've been feeling disorganized for days now. I didn't notice them either, Mark remarked. And honestly, I'm usually the one who picks up on these things. So don't be too hard on yourself, all right? Okay, Rachel laughed, rolling her eyes. Mark was really going above and beyond to make her feel better, but it was endearing how much he cared. Plus, it felt nice not to be judged. She wished more people's partners could be like him. Their conversation drifted into a comfortable silence. Suddenly, a buzzing sound began emanating from the office, gradually escalating into a low drone. Rachel sighed, realizing that the droning noise was just a hallucination, clearly hadn't made it disappear. She took a deep breath, concentrated on the TV, and tried to ignore it. Fortunately, the droning eventually subsided on its own, but she figured it would be wise to keep an eye on her recurring hallucinations until she felt more stable. With that thought in mind, Rachel glanced toward the kitchen to tell Mark about her auditory experience, only to see he wasn't facing the stove. He wasn't even looking at her. His gaze was directed toward the office. A chill ran down Rachel's spine. Time seemed to stretch as Mark finally turned to her and asked the one question she dreaded. "Did you hear that?"